to express it.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Ross has got time. Mr. Raskin has seniority, but I'm going to recognize Ms. Ross because she has that John Kennedy picture in the screen, and I think Mr. Raskin is great at batting cleanup. Ms. Ross, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just wanted Mr. Raskin to know that I got my copy of Vogue magazine today with a big feature on him and his book and his family, and he is not only an excellent member of the committee, but a celebrity in Vogue now, so congratulations to him for that. I also want to thank everybody who came to testify today, and you know, this is such an important issue. And right now it is front of mind for the American people because of what's going on the Senate side. But in North Carolina, it has been front of mind for centuries. I'm a former civil rights attorney and a state legislator from North Carolina, and I've witnessed firsthand efforts to reduce the power of minority voters in my home state through racial gerrymandering and voter suppression laws. Last week, a 3-judge panel upheld North Carolina's new maps for U.S. Congress, the North Carolina Senate, and the North Carolina General Assembly. These maps are intended to further reduce Democratic representation, an outcome that's also likely to dilute the power of minority voters and reduce minority representation at both the state and federal level. While this is not the outcome I had hoped for, the panel did establish key findings about the unequal nature of these maps and laid the foundation for the state Supreme Court to rule against partisan gerrymandering on appeal under the state constitution. The recent efforts in my state to undermine the continuance of American democracy highlight the importance of passing federal voting rights legislation to ensure that our governing institutions reflect the diverse communities they represent. And it's consistent with our history. Finally, I want to correct a misconception that members of both parties have, that expanding voting rights only helps Democrats at the ballot box. In 2020, the North Carolina offered the longest voting period in the country, largely because we're a military state. The State Board of Elections mailed absentee ballot to voters 60 days before the November 3rd election, earlier than any state. In-person early voting was open for 19 days prior to the election, and same-day voter registration was allowed at all early voting locations because of a bill I worked on when I was in the state legislature. Because our state made voting so convenient, North Carolina saw record voter turnout in 2020, with 75% of voters casting ballots. Because of, not despite, the ease of access to the ballots, Republicans secured victories across the state, including Donald Trump. North Carolina's experience shows that progressive voting laws do not uniformly benefit Democrats and disadvantage Republicans. Instead, they serve the interest of candidates from both parties who can most effectively energize and inspire our state's closely divided electorate. My question is for both Sherilyn Ifill and Derek Johnson. Please describe the impact of North Carolina's congressional and legislative maps, the current ones, on the voting rights of minority citizens.
Thank you very much for the question. I will concede that LDF has not mounted a challenge around the North Carolina congressional maps, although I am familiar with what you have described, and it very much reflects what we are seeing in multiple states. We heard reference to it in Georgia from Representative McBath. We are seeing this in Alabama. We've seen this in South Carolina. And we're closely watching Louisiana, where members of the LDF staff are today testifying in Baton Rouge. And that is that the growth in the Black and Latino population in these states, and I guess Tom Cyan referenced this as well, is not being reflected in the congressional maps that are being drawn. This is the equivalent of erasing our population and the representation to which they are entitled and deserve As I said earlier, this is not only at the congressional level, it's not only at the state house level, but we're also seeing it in county commission races, in judicial districts, in school board districts as well. This is what the project really has been about. We all know that gerrymandered maps get grandfathered from decade to decade. They constitute what becomes a permanent lockout or a permanent diminution of voting strength for racial minorities. And so when we see this going forward, when we see the failure to take account of the population increases that have happened, largely racial minority population increases within these maps, this is directly a threat to the full citizenship and representation of people who have a right to have their numbers properly reflected in districting maps. Our work this year, that's what it's all about. It's about ensuring that we can try and
Ms. Eiffel, our time is up.
reverse the gerrymandered districts that have shut our communities out of full voting strength for now decades.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. I appreciate it. Now I'd like to recognize